Carrie Schwab-Pomerantz, certified financial planner. Well, I feel like good to see you again. It's good to see you again.
And always fun to work with you.
The last time we were together, for our audience that is tuned into the Retire Sooner podcast, you may remember Carrie from Money Matters. Back a couple years ago, you were in Atlanta, so I had the pleasure of meeting you in person. You were in the studio, and we talked about your charitable work. And by the way, ever since that interview, Carrie, I've been using Schwab Charitable Fund. So that's the one I
so
use.
Glad.
And I think then it was an app, and now it's all integrated with Schwab. And so I'm not only I guess I'm also a user, and I'm a big fan of Schwab Charitable too. So in all of your work. So Carrie, who you may know of as she's an author, personal finance expert, and really an advocate for financial literacy is a really huge part of what Carrie does. Also, the book that keeps staying on the top list, which is the Charles Schwab Guide to Finances After 50. You wrote that back in 2014, right?
I think that's good memory. I think it was about then.
Still going. It's still, is there it's timeless advice. It's an awesome book, and I guess that's why people keep buying it. So.
Well, I wrote it in such a way where there are 50 questions, and that way people didn't feel overwhelmed by having to go at the beginning of the book and read 200 pages, right, to learn all about retirement. They could just slip in depending on the questions they have in the book to see what they can do, or to learn what they can do in that specific situation.
Well, and maybe that's why it makes it very consumable, and you can kind of go to what you need. And I think that it's obviously you're also the chair of the Boys and Girls Club, which is headquartered in Atlanta. And when did you start that, like, fifth job of yours?
Yeah, so I've been involved with the National Board of Boys and Girls Club for quite a while, for about 10 years. And I was voted in as national chair effective January. And I have to say, I am so honored, excited to be involved with this organization, which is I think it's the largest youth agency in the United States, serving teens from inner city, rural areas, military, Native American land, up to 5 million children. And so it's just really meaningful to be able to have a small impact on this organization.
Well, and you do, I suspect, though, what do you do for, I guess, kids there? Do you have a financial literacy program through that too? Or are you doing something to that impact?
Yeah, so about 20 years ago, when I took over the foundation, Schwab's corporate foundation, I wanted to restructure it around financial literacy, and primarily for youth, because the lack of financial literacy in this country cuts across Americans from all walks of life. It's blind to socioeconomic status, gender, race, ethnicity. And one way to really make a difference was to co-create with Boys and Girls Club this national financial education program, which is, it's evolved over time. It's about 24 lessons now. But we're trying to give kids the tools and resources to make good decisions right out of the gate. And we've had well over 1 million children go through the program. And we know those kids who go through Money Matters are more likely to seek out going to college. So we know with Financial Matters, financial literacy actually supports people in their lives, no matter whether it's college access, wealth equality, or even workforce readiness. It's really important for that as well.
What age do they do that? It's Money Matters, which caught my eye.
Yeah.
But it's called Make It Count. Money Matters, Make It Count.
Yes, exactly, exactly. And it's for ages 13 to 18 years old. And, we try to make it fun. It's actually has always been one of the top growing programs at Boys and Girls Club. Cool. What I've learned through all my work is that young people really want to learn about finances, savings, budgeting, investing. They're very excited by it. So, as a parent, it's also a great opportunity to get your kids on the right foot.
It is amazing, just the inherent, I don't know, the impact of understanding money and everything associated with it, or maybe not everything, how early kids latch onto that. My youngest just turned 5. And I have four boys, 14, 11, 9, and one who, little Samuel, just turned 5. But it's funny because this is like 6 months ago, so he's still a 4-year-old. he asked me, and I was putting him to bed one night, and he said, Dad, what if you had all the money in the world? What would you do first with it? This is coming like from a 4-year-old kid. I'm like, dude, where did you
Wow.
get that, Sam?
Yeah.
Maybe it's his older brothers.
Yeah.
So
That's great. That's great. What'd you tell him? What'd you tell him?
I said, I know what you would do. I said, first I was like, what would you do? And he goes, Dad, I would buy a modern mansion.
Yeah.
And there's something weird. And I've realized what happened over the last like 2 years when you have little kids in America. So if you're listening, you may relate back to this, is that when you have little kids, they spend more time on YouTube than you want them to.
Oh, yeah.
Unless you cut off the internet connection. That's the
Virtual
only way to
gaming.
prevent it. And the internet, the young YouTube stars that make money, all of them go out and buy these, what I would consider a modern looking mansion. So you got a bunch of 25-year-old rich people in California buying modern mansions on the water. And that's what my kids see. They're like, oh, you make money on YouTube and you can buy a modern mansion. And I'm like, okay, all right.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Everybody can become a millionaire today.
So let's dive into kind of, again, this is the Retire Sooner podcast. And I've written and researched for 20 years on the habits of happy retirees. What are those financial and consumer habits?
Yeah.
And then how does that lead potentially to an earlier retirement or retire sooner? The happy retirees in general have the habits to get to retire a little bit sooner. So I guess I would ask you, there's so many paths to get to XYZ, this some sort of financial freedom destination, however we want to reference it. But I guess the first question I would have that's maybe just more practical is that if you are, how much do you need? I mean, how do you counsel people to know what is the amount? How do you approach what I think is a very simple but not easy question to answer?
Yeah, it's certainly not, because it really depends on where you live and your current lifestyle. And I know, you talked about the retiring early phenomenon. What do they call it? The FIRE group?
Right. FIRE is like, those are the folks that are like in there at 30,
Yeah.
they say they're going to stop working.
Yeah. So anyway, it depends.
By the way, I love you basically giggled about that.
Well, I
was
know.
like, yeah, good luck.
Good luck. Yeah, I think they don't use heaters, and
Right.
they no cars and so forth. But it's admirable. I think anybody in my mind who saves and invests early on and takes it seriously is a hero in my mind, because so few Americans are either not in a position, they don't feel they're in a position to do it, or they don't. They think they'll get to it another time. But anyway, to answer your question, I'll share a rule of thumb, and it's a little bit, it's difficult, so I'll try to go slow. I call it the 25 rule. So basically what you need is, and again, it's a rule of thumb only, 25 times the amount you expect to spend annually at retirement. So let me give you an example. If you think you're going to live off $75,000 a year, and you're going to get $25,000 from Social Security or other means of income, but you need your savings, your portfolio, your 401k, whatever you have, to generate $50,000 a year. The difference of everything else. What you do is you multiply that 50,000 times 25. And that comes to $1.25 million. And I know for a lot of people, that is really a scary thought. And so, what I would say to people is don't get discouraged. Start saving in early as soon as you can. You mentioned your 4-year-old. He's maybe a little young to save for retirement. But when my kids were 16 and they got their first real jobs, I opened up Roth IRAs for them. So they know, starting at 16, that they have to save for the retirement. So as we know, the sooner you start saving and investing, the easier it is over time. And again, I would sit down. It might be time to get some help from a professional, or sit down and just really crunch the numbers.
Carrie, I love that way of looking at it. It's actually the inverse of the way I look at it.
The
but
4%.
It's actually probably a better way of looking at it than the way I talk about the 4% plus rule.
Yeah.
Because it's really the 4 to 4.5, and it's a very dynamic rule of thumb. But to maybe even think of it in in a more straightforward way or simpler way. If I'm 30 and I'm thinking, hey, I want to retire and I'm going to need 100,000 from beyond Social Security, and maybe I'll have a pension,
Yeah,
maybe not. Then it's easy. 25 times that, 2.5 million. Done.
exactly.
Right? I mean, I
Exactly.
love that way of looking at it. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe I'm
Yeah.
just going to change my entire. I have a whole episode on the 4% rule. I'm going to have to scrap it. And,
Well, you can
do
throw that in for some interest.
I might have to throw this in. As Carrie
Yeah.
Schwab-Pomerantz would say, the 25 times rule. You call it the 25 the 25 rule?
Yeah, 25 times rule. You know,
love that.
whatever.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Easy. So now let's say you get to 50 and you haven't saved. What do you do? Is game over? Or is it Susie Orman time? You just have to work till you're 110.
Well, I mean, definitely you need to do some soul searching. First of all, it's never too late to save. Let's just take a 50-year-old, for example. You can easily live till you're 80 years old, another 30 years or more. I have a great grandmother that lived to 107. So you still have plenty of time to save, but you are going to have to do some soul searching, you know, and some planning. What I suggest is a great exercise is track your spending for 1 month time, everything, and then bucket each of the expenditures in two categories: essential expenses, you know, like food, rent, utilities, versus non-essential, you know, sort of the fun stuff, things you could have or not have. And that's the bucket where you really could find places to cut back and save for retirement. Now, you know, and as you know, you can save up to with a 401k up to $19,500. And if you can do that, by all means, you know, definitely go for it and take advantage of any company match if you do have a 401k.
Now, let's think about the folks that are listening to this. They're in the retire sooner mode, which in my mind is kind of somewhere in between the FIRE movement, which I think is usually not practical.
Yeah.
And the, hey, I have to work forever. Or to your point, many people in America don't even really get close to being able to think about this full financial freedom of retiring. So if you're somebody who wants to retire, in my book, 50, 55 is pretty darn early retiree.
Yeah.
And you've got to do a lot of things right to be able to be in a position that early on.
Yeah.
And what do you say to that group? Hey, I want to retire sooner than 65, Carrie.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I mean, there's a lot of considerations to that. First of all, again, it's about crunching the numbers. You know, I equate it to, you know, an airline pilot. He's got to do a pre-check, right, before he takes off. So really see where you stand in term financially. What is your net worth? What are you going to need to generate at retirement? So that's first and foremost. But what people probably don't think about is that you are going to have more savings. Some of these rule of thumbs, like the 4% rule, the 25 times rule, assumes a 30-year retirement. If you're retiring at 50 and you're living till 90, 95, you're going to need more savings because you're going to have to cover more years of retirement. And then also health insurance. A lot of people don't think about that. You know, obviously when you're 65, you have access to Medicare, but otherwise you're going to have to fund it yourself. So you got to add that into the mix. And then lastly, really the emotional and social component of retiring. You know, are you ready to totally disengage, or do you have a plan for how you're going to spend your time? Because that's, you know, happiness is what, you know, and having purpose is what creates longevity. And part-time work actually is a great alternative because you're still, you know, you're not depleting your savings, your retirement savings, you know, at quite the same rate, and you're being engaged.
And I love that because, and ever since I wrote You Can Retire Sooner Than You Think, folks have come to me younger and younger and younger. And very often the financial planning answer is what you just described. I call the financial gray zone, where you kind of have enough to retire, but it might just be too darn early. So if you can get into a position where, let's say you downshift your job to something more fun that you enjoy more, but it maybe pays a lot less. But as long as it's just enough to not have to really tap the savings at a certain time. And then maybe you do that for 3 to 5 years. To me, that's this retirement gray zone that is a really nice first downshift before you're fully stop working. So I love that.
Yeah,
Now,
and Wes, I was just
yeah.
sorry, I was just going to say also, you have more time for your money to grow in your particular situation, right? You're not depleting it. If you're earning just enough to live off of, let your portfolio, your 401k or your retirement account grow.
Give it another 5 years. Yeah.
Yeah, and assuming obviously if you have to have equities for sure, stocks in your portfolio.
How about Social Security? I mean, here we are, and let's call it 2021, record government debt. We're worried about how we can't even begin to think about getting rid of that. Then that doesn't even count, the 27, almost $30 trillion that we're in debt. That doesn't even touch all of the obligations for Social Security. What do we do on social? If I'm 50 today, do I think, or if I'm 40 today, do I count on Social Security at 62, 65, or is it going to be gone? Is it going to be 2/3 of what it's supposed to be? I mean, what's your take on when to take it even?
Yeah, well, of course, I don't have the crystal ball, about what's going to happen, but I have to believe, first of all, there's no way that Congress is going to let that go. There's just no way. They'll be out of office soon. But either so, let's just say they change some of the rules. They're going to protect some of the people that are older, right, in terms of their benefits. They're not going to change the rules on them so quickly. But Social Security is really actually an important consideration in your retirement plans. And so a lot of people don't realize that you can take Social Security out as early as 62. But we know that the monthly benefit will be greatly reduced. However, if you wait till you're 70 years old, you can get a benefit about 76% more. So that's a pretty big difference. So if you're healthy and you're working and you don't need the money, by all means, wait until you're 70. Like, for me, I'll probably wait till I'm 70 because I'm planning to live to 107 like my great grandmother. Yeah. And, but if you aren't healthy and you are financially struggling, then you may, need to tap into Social Security now.
Again, you're right. That's one of those. I think Social Security as a conversation, a big variable here is that it's really important to figure it out for you in particular is kind of the answer you gave. Yeah. It's very different for everyone. Yeah. And I love the way you think about that. I think the other question, and you mentioned this earlier as we started talking, is I'm a big advocate of paying off a mortgage. That's one of the big financial checkpoints for the happy retiree. In fact, I have a chart that shows that as years to pay off mortgage go down, light of the end of the tunnel gets bigger, right? Happiness levels literally go up. So it's actually one of my favorite charts. But I guess the question I have is there's a lot of different ways to look at this. Do you think people should pay off the house and when? Or you mentioned different areas of the country are so different from housing costs. Like you're in San Francisco, super expensive. Yeah. If you're listening to the Retired Student Podcast I don't know, if you're somewhere in Texas or Colorado, or I don't know, it may be a lot less expensive. Yeah.
So, it's interesting. I did not realize that your study shows that paying off your loan equates to happiness. That's very interesting. And that's really the emotional side of retiring, the emotional side of money. But that decision is twofold, quite frankly. It's not just how you're going to feel internally, but also how is it going to affect your finances. And what happens is you're taking money out of savings to pay off your loan, which goes into your house. And your house is what we say is illiquid. It's not easy cash. It's no longer easy cash. So for somebody who doesn't have as much saved in retirement, and I'll just make this up, hopefully they'll have more, but let's say someone has $300,000 saved and they owe $100,000. Then, then they deplete their savings by $100,000. They only have $200,000 to access during retirement. And that could be potentially a scary situation. So liquidity first, and then, if you can pay it off, great.
Yeah, you can't. unfortunately at Publix or Kroger, you can't pay for groceries with shingles from the house, right? I think it's a good point of you've got to have a certain amount of liquidity in order to have the luxury, I think, of being able to have zero mortgage, which happy retirees certainly work towards. Maybe let's talk about stocks for a minute. I mean, the last, my goodness, I mean, I in the career, the 20 some years I've been doing this, we've had 3 major bear markets. COVID is still, very fresh in the world. That was a scary March of what, 2000.
Yeah.
And then we had the GameStop phenomenon where stocks went through the roof, and I think that the question goes back to at different ages, what are your feelings on investing in equities? And then do you still invest heavily in equities in your 60s, 70s, 80s when you're fully in retirement?
Okay, well, growing up with my father.
Well, did we forget to even mention that? I almost feel like that's a given, but tell everyone who your father is and make that connection for us, please.
My father is Chuck Schwab, Charles Schwab, who founded Charles Schwab and Company. And actually, I started working there when I was 16. It was a total startup. It wasn't in a garage, but it was a complete startup. And so I got to watch it grow to what it is today. And I'll just tell you.
And back then, when you were 16, it literally like how many employees back then?
I feel like 10 maybe.
I remember total startup.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I'll tell you. So, well, first of all, so it was like 2 rooms, and one room was just a little conference room with an oval table, and each of the brokers had black rotary phones. And then you had Henrietta, with the boo font. She was a switchboard operator switching in our client calls. And as my dad said, I was a file clerk. And, no one files anymore. I was slipping in count applications in the file cabinet. So that was my job. But yeah, so long time ago. But, you asked about equities, and I'll just tell a cute story. And this is for a younger crowd. But when I was in my early 20s, IRAs were just becoming prevalent. And I put in my $2,000, and I called my dad and I said, Dad, you think, what should I invest my IRA in? And I was so disappointed with his answer, Wes. He told me to pick 2 equity funds, 2 stock funds. Mm-hmm. Well, I thought he was going to tell me the hot stock of the day. Mm-hmm. And, I share that story because he's so right. It was a big lesson for me, because investing is, of course, about diversification and also long-term investing. And so I'm a big believer, in ETFs, mutual funds, and getting that easy, inexpensive diversification. But anyway, that's what I tell all 20-year-olds, to pick some mutual funds or ETFs. That's what I tell my kids anyway.
But it's right. I think the allure, it's interesting, because the allure then when you were 20 is probably not that different than it is today, right? It's probably even more, maybe slightly more alluring, because you hear even more about hot stocks through the news and Reddit, but it's still very much, if you were to project out another 20, what's the best course of action? It's probably the marathon route, right, and not the sprint.
No, it's not. And you should always have equities in your portfolio. You mentioned about older people. We will tell our clients, or anybody who asks in our education, that people in retirement should also have 20% of, I say, equities, which are stocks, a diversified portfolio of stocks. And that's because of basically of inflation. And
you're saying at least a bare minimum 20%.
20%. Mm-hmm.
Even very conservative investors that are in their 70s, 80s, still at least 20, right?
Yeah. I mean, if you're in your 80s or 90s, you might switch out. But if you're in 65, you should at least have 20%, because you could live, again, another 30 years. And you will lose purchasing power. So today, you can't buy I mean, today you would get a bag of groceries. You will not be able to get those same groceries in 10, 20 years, right? Because it'll be a lot more expensive. So you want your portfolio, you want your savings to grow and beyond inflation.
So let's go to, for most 20s, 30s, 40s, and really just for most of us, that pensions have gone away, right? Unless you're still with a utility company, or maybe you're a teacher, you might still, or government, you might still have a decent pension accruing. But really, the 401k has replaced that. And then that is the primary vehicle that Americans save in, right?
Yeah.
What if you don't have one of those at work?
Yeah, so there's about a third of Americans who do not have access to a 401k. And it's, if I could, wave a wand, we all would have a 401k, because what I found is that so many Americans become first-time investors because of a 401k. But the bottom line is we've got a lot of small companies that may think, it's too complex, too expensive, which, by the way, is not the case so much anymore. There are options out there for employers to adopt some type of retirement savings for their employees. But if you don't have one, like you've kind of alluded to it, Wes, we live in a world of doing it ourselves. We are responsible to save for our own retirement. It's no one else's responsibility. So the IRA is a great option, where you get tax deferred growth. So it allows your money to grow faster than it would in a regular, more taxed account. And you can save up to $6,000 a year, another $1,000 if you're over 50. But to be honest with you, that's still not enough money to save. I mean, that's not enough. That's not going to get you to, I'll call it your 25
your
roll.
25X roll, yeah.
Yeah, so you're going to have to save over and beyond. And when I say save, I also mean investing. Otherwise, you will not get the growth that you need, the compound growth that you need to retire comfortably.
And that goes back to your thought of, hey, either stock or fund. And the answer is probably, whether it's stock or fund or ETF, it's really equities is really what you're talking about. And with diversification, obviously.
Correct. Stocks. I mean, they're genetically engineered to grow. Bonds are not. Bonds are debt. And cash, what is the interest rate? Whatever, 0.5%, if that. So you're just not going to get the growth.
That is a keeper of a line, by the way. I'll use that forever.
Which one?
Genetically engineered to grow.
Yeah. Actually, I got that one from my dad, actually.
Okay. Well, it's the
Many
third
years
generation.
Ago.
I'll
G2.
I'll say it's the Schwabs.
Oh,
it's
you're
the
sure?
Schwabs
Okay.
I got this from the Schwab family.